Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen before we start and just talk about some upcoming webinars that we have with COEH. So next Tuesday coming up, Emanuele Cauda will be speaking on the evaluation of occupational hygiene via new technologies and methodologies he's been researching. This is in collaboration with the New York, New Jersey ERC, and it's from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. Then later in the month, on June 24th, Christina Banks with the California Labor Lab will present outcomes from the second of three phases of the Work Future Initiative, where research and practitioners from 18 disciplines led discussions on the future of work and the worker experience. Again, that's on Wednesday, June 24th at 12 p.m. Pacific time. And to find out more, you can always visit us at coeh.berkeley.edu/webinars. I'll share that in the chat if I can find it. And then for today's webinar, do's and don'ts of employing teen workers. I'm excited to introduce our speakers for today. Just a few housekeeping items first. You're going to be muted during this presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please enter it into the online Q&A box. We're going to have some time at the end of the presentation to address as many questions as possible. We also have the chat open today, and especially for this webinar, we encourage you to use the chat and engage in the discussion. We're also going to have specific questions for you in the poll to fill out. I'm going to open this poll right now, so feel free to take a look. Hestia and Linda, I just want to make sure that that went out and y'all can see that.
Yes.
Perfect.
We do.
Okay, great. Thank you. This presentation is also partially recorded, and that recorded section will be made available on the CUEH YouTube page within the next 5 business days. Both presenters today have also made their slides available, so feel free to email us at cohce.berkeley.edu to get those slide decks. And as usual, all participants who logged in with their registration email for the full live presentation today will receive an email tomorrow with a link to an evaluation form, and that will also have information about the certificate of completion worth 1 continuing education contact hour. Once that evaluation is completed, you'll be able to access and print your certificate. So I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today, Hestia Rojas and Linda Lee. Hestia Rojas is a program coordinator with the Labor Occupational Health Program at UC Berkeley, where she facilitates health and safety training for workers across all industries around California. Hestia has 12 years of experience in capacity building and program planning across multiple fields, including worker health, reproductive health, and HIV prevention. And our second speaker, Linda Lee, is a lead outreach and education coordinator with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's Office of Communication and Legislative Affairs, with the responsibility for California, Nevada, and the Pacific Northwest. Since 1998, Linda's chief goal has been to share the human stories behind EEOC's cases and to make the law accessible to all stakeholders, including small business owners, union representatives, farm workers, people with disabilities, veterans, trade apprentices, and high school students. So the way this webinar will work today is Hestia will kick it off with a presentation on young worker health and safety. Many employers fear hiring young workers because of the regulations involved, but we know that young workers are more motivated, energetic, and adaptable. At the same time, it's important to ensure that young workers stay safe and healthy while working. We'll be reviewing strategies to ensure that you as employers can create safe and healthy workplaces. Linda will then follow with a review of employer responsibilities under federal equal employment opportunity laws, with an emphasis on what you can do to stop workplace harassment, which is the top allegation in EEOC cases involving teen workers. And just to note, most of the legal information provided in Hestia's presentation today will be specific to California, while Linda's presentation will cover federal laws that apply nationally. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll hand it over to you, Hestia.
Thanks, Will. And I want to thank Will for pulling this all together. It's a lot of effort. And so thank you so much for all of the effort that you've put in. I'm sending a request to share.
You should be
Um,
good now.
Perfect. And hopefully I don't have the poll up in front of me, but if for those of you who haven't filled out the poll, if you could please fill that out, that would be great. And also would love to see in the chat if you can put your name, company, industry slash role, and also what you hope to learn today, because we would love to just have a little bit more information about you all. And so I will be kicking it off with a presentation on young worker health and safety. We'll be talking a little bit about why it's important to think about young worker health and safety. And if you have any questions that come up about specific tasks that young workers can and can't do, I encourage you to chat those in. If I can't answer those questions now, I'll make sure that we send that out to all of you. And then also, I'm seeing that Will has pulled up the poll, I think, and so I'm seeing that a lot of you are actually the majority are more advocates. Wanting to support young workers with their rights on the job. And a lot of people put others. So I'm curious to know where you all are coming from. Please put that in the chat. And then also, it looks like most of you actually don't have young workers at your work site, but a lot of you are looking like you might want to. And then also, it looks like those of you who do provide extra training for young workers, some of you, and some of you have answered no, and hopefully you will after today. And then have your supervisors been trained to work with young workers? Most of you are unsure or trying to figure that out. So you've come to the right place. I work for the Labor Occupational Health Program. We are a nonprofit run out of UC Berkeley, and our goal is essentially just to keep workers safe in the same condition that they go to the workplace, come back in the same condition. And so we have a bunch of different programs. This is a little bit of an overview of our work that we have. We do campaigns. We also do community engaged research, and we do trainings for workers of various different industries all across California, not just the young workers, but also other folks. So if you have your own health and safety issues you want to address, I encourage you to also reach out to me because we probably have a program that would support you on that. So first, I want to start off with a question. Why employ young workers? What are some of the reasons? And feel free to chat in. What are some of the reasons that you would want to employ young workers? And I'll see if any of you feel free to chat it in. What are the reasons? And maybe you haven't thought of this yet. Oh, we have one up. So Monique mentioned seasonal work. Yeah, exactly. So we know there's a lot of reasons to help them get a head start in their career or industry. Exactly. And so there's a number of reasons why it can be really great to have young workers in your workplace. So one is the enthusiasm that they bring. We know that they often have a lot of energy, and they also have the ability to learn quickly. We know that young workers can be quite adaptable and sometimes to their own detriment, right? We want to talk through, how adaptable they can be and why it might become a health and safety concern. But for the most part, it's a valuable thing. And they bring a lot of creativity. We also know that they add to workplace diversity. It's great when you're trying to assess different audiences or folks that you reach out to with your company or business to have folks who are the age of your clients. And then also, we know it can be cost effective, but we also want to keep in mind that the minimum wage, at least in California, is $16.90 an hour. I also want to ask Linda to support me with the chat, just in case I miss anything important to call it out. Thank you. So we always start off our story, our information, our trainings with a story about a young worker who unfortunately was killed on the job. So even though we have all these really great reasons to employ young workers, we also want to be aware that a lot of times the work that young workers engage in can be quite dangerous, and that's often for a number of reasons. They're usually taking these roles that tend to be a little more customer facing, have a little more equipment involved, and they work retail, they work, in the restaurant industry, and so these are industries that that tend to have a few more hazards. And so in this case, there was a young worker. His name was Omar. He was 16 years old and he was working in the city of Firebaugh at a tire repair shop as an assistant. And the shop was owned by his uncle, and so there was an adult on site, but not in the area where he was working. And so he was asked to change a flat tire. And in order to do so, he and the other young worker who was by his side had to use a hydraulic jack to lift up the car. And we know that that's actually illegal for anyone who's under 18 years old to operate. But Omar was really eager to impress. He and the other young worker wanted to do this service and to impress the client. And so they decided to go forward with that. And they were also asked to do an oil change. And this was actually a service they didn't usually provide. But again, they wanted to impress the client. And so they lifted up both sides of the car, but they only used blocking or cribbing on one side of the car. And so while Omar was underneath the car, it unfortunately fell off one of the jacks and it ended up crushing him to death in front of this other young worker who was there at the same time. And so the reason we share this story, one, I want to share that we got permission from the family and we're actually encouraged to share this story out because we find that these incidences can be quite common if employers are not taking precautions to protect young workers. He had taken an automotive class and worked at a repair shop the previous summer, but he didn't actually have proper work permits that would have outlined that he wasn't allowed to get under lifted cars, and it would have shown that he wasn't properly trained. And so we know that these incidences are quite common in 2020. There are around 5,000 injuries and 350 fatalities for those under the age of 24. And so listening to this story, I want to just ask, so what happened? So the direct incident that happened is that Omar fulfilled a task that he wasn't supposed to, right? But we know that there are all these underlying reasons why this incident happened. So if you would in the chat, what were some of the things that you noticed that maybe went wrong with this situation that led to Omar getting killed on the job? And I'll just give a pause. I would love for you all to chat in, and I kind of brought up the first note here. So Megan said no adult present. There was a lack of supervision and training. Exactly, like the supervision was a huge piece. And I appreciate the person who called out the training as well, because we know that training is extremely important, especially when it comes to young workers. A lot of times folks will say, well, young workers, they just don't have common sense. But the thing is, common sense is actually an accumulation of different experiences across the course of someone's career. And so we want to make sure that young workers actually have that training before they get started. There also wasn't a work permit. That is actually something that is legally required now. There was no adult supervision and no enforcement of child labor laws. And it's extremely important that young workers know their rights on the job, but also that employers are familiar with the rights of young workers. And that's because employers are actually the ones who are legally responsible for young workers' health and safety. And also just to add here, so we know that teens are way more likely to get hurt on the job compared with adults, actually 1.5 times as likely. And that's for some of the reasons that I just described. And one of the notes that I didn't put on that list as well is that young workers' brains are often developing. They may not realize that they're at risk for certain injuries. And they also are in the habit of trying to please older folks, right? Like their employers at school, they're told to just pay attention, right? So they don't have those skills to actually advocate for themselves when they need to, and they need to be encouraged to report when there are hazards at work that can hurt them. A lot of times what we see in the news is that there is sort of this direct cause that's mentioned that leads to a young worker getting injured or killed. And so one example of this is like, oh, they were on their phones and they didn't pay attention. And so we know that that can play a role, right? But when we're thinking about why an injury or fatality happened, we really want to think about what's below the metaphorical iceberg, right? And so the part above is what we can see, but we really want to pay attention to what are the factors that led to the incident that we maybe don't see right away. And so Alejandra actually put in the chat, he may have felt uncomfortable saying no to unsafe work, right? And so that's exactly one of the things, right? Like the work culture is going to be extremely important when it comes to encouraging young workers to report when they feel unsafe. There might also be tasks and procedures they need to be trained on, and also the work environment. Is it one where folks feel safe speaking up when there are issues, or is it an environment where they don't feel like they have that ability because they might get retaliated against. And so legally, we know that the person who is at fault when these incidences happen are the employers, right? And so the employers, regardless of whether or not they think, it's the young worker who made the mistake, et cetera, they were trained, they should have known. Legally, it is in your best interest, to make sure that the workplace is a safe and healthy one. So, how can we ensure that teens are safe at work? I'm going to be going through a bunch of different strategies, and they're all from a worksheet or a fact sheet that I encourage you to take a look at that we've just redeveloped called Hiring Teens. This is sort of the overview of what it looks like. It gets into the hours, the tasks that young workers are allowed to do. And so that is what I'll be sort of highlighting or going through an overview of today. So the first is to know and comply with the law. We want employers to really be familiar with what are the rights that young workers have. And part of that is knowing what their schedules are allowed to be. Young workers actually have limitations on the hours that they are and aren't allowed to work. And it often depends on whether it is during school. So for example, if it's the summer, there's a lot more flexibility in their schedules. But the purpose of this is to really make sure that they're focusing on their education and that they have the energy to be able to work. We know that students who are going to school and then working at late hours into the night after school are more likely to get injured on the job because they're getting very little sleep, and a lack of sleep could lead to more injuries and fatalities. And we want to make sure that you're complying with Cal OSHA regulations. The second is really making sure that young workers have work permits. And that is a huge piece because it outlines the tasks that they can and can't do. And this is now legally required. I'm going to pause this video for a sec. And so teens under 18 have to have a work permit, and they can get that through their school district. And they are not required for those who have graduated or have a high school equivalency exam, although we know that it's super important for those folks to also have access to health and safety info. I'm going to just share my sound really. Oh, actually, I think I'm having trouble sharing for now, but this is a video that goes through the different hazards that exist for teen workers. We have a series of videos on our website that prepare young workers for getting a work permit. So I highly encourage you to check out this video. If you click on the YouTube link part, you'll be able to find a series of videos that will provide more information. And there's actually a quiz that we have on our website that young workers can take and get a certificate and then send that over to their teacher or whoever is in charge of the work permit to let them know that they've, reviewed this information and have passed the quiz. So the third very important thing is that for supervisors to stress safety. And so we want to make sure that supervisors give teens job assignments that, are going to be okay for their age group, and also that they're promoting a culture of workplace health and safety. And that means really paying attention to what the laws are and creating space for young workers to focus on health and safety instead of on productivity or on the deliverables that whatever business is, supplying. And so the other thing is that they should be encouraging, businesses should be encouraging supervisors to set a good example and should also be aware of the age of the supervisors. A lot of times when we think of supervisors, we think of folks who are much older than us, or, sort of have like, or at least are our peers, right, as adults. But really, we want to think about folks who are younger as well, because they're often the ones managing the young workers. They themselves might be getting used to learning about health and safety hazards. And then I briefly want to mention that it's really important for employers to set up a health and safety program. This is known as the Injury and Illness Prevention Plan. I have included a screenshot of the different components that are part of that plan. I also have added a QR code here, so I encourage you to use your phone to pull them out and access our trainings on the IIPP as it's known. Monique, who is in our webinar today, can share some more information about that as well. And so we want to make sure that all jobs and work areas are free of hazards and that employers have actually thought through what are the health and safety hazards in this workplace, not just for young workers, but for everyone. And then we also want to make sure that folks are participating in the creation of the injury and illness prevention program. So again, this is a program that is required by law. It is one of the most commonly cited Cal OSHA violations. If you don't have an injury and illness prevention program, I really encourage you to check out our training and start creating one because again, it's very important for keeping your workers safe in the workplace, not just your young workers, but your adults as well. And you also want to try to train teens to put safety first. And I was starting to get at that, but I think it's very easy for us to start focusing on the output of whatever service is being provided. So for example, with fast food workers, we know that fast food workers are often in a rush because there's so many customers, they're understaffed. And so they don't have all the staff necessary to make sure that they're putting safety first. But when you hire more staff, when you slow down the pace of work, you're ensuring that workers actually are able to put health and safety first. So you also want to set up a program where you're observing teens and making sure that they're making corrections for safety and encouraged to speak up if there is some sort of problem. Also providing proper PPE for your young workers. And this is where we get to the part where are there tasks that young workers can and can't do? And the answer is yes. So we know that teens under 18 can't do these following tasks: operate meat slicers, baking machines, box crushers, woodworking machines, punches, hoists, forklifts, circular saws, hand saws, guillotine shears. And this seems like a really large list. And a lot of times young workers are not happy to find out about this, right? Because they want to be doing the work that older adults are doing, right? But the reality is these regulations are in place to protect young workers. And so we want to communicate not just the tasks that they can and can't do, but why they aren't allowed to operate a meat slicer, for example. Meat slicers we know are extremely dangerous. And so a lot of adults will actually get injured on a meat slicer. And that's why this protection is in place, right? We don't want them to get injured so early on in their careers, right? And then also teens under 18 cannot drive a vehicle as part of their job, handle alcoholic beverages, be exposed to radioactive substances, and work in these industries. And that's because these are the industries or tasks that tend to be a little bit riskier. So things like logging or sawmilling. I was just talking to my father-in-law about roofing, and he was describing how difficult it is to do roofing. And you have to carry a lot of weight. You're getting up at like very high heights, right? So there are reasons why we have these regulations. And thank you to Earl Hall, who's chatting in additional information that's super helpful. Earl actually funds one of our programs, which I'll be sharing momentarily. And these are the tests that young workers under 16 can't do. I know I'm strapped for time, so I'll just pull them up here. But you really want to be paying attention to the tasks and also the hours that young workers can and can't work. So I want to share a couple of resources. This is a lot of information, and it's probably not going to be something you retain just in your head. And so we have a worksheet for employers called Hiring Teens. And again, I mentioned it earlier. Will chat that in. And I encourage you to take a look at that fact sheet because it has all of the information that you'll need, including that information about the tasks and the work hours. And then this is where we've been storing all of our resources. It's our website, and so Will can also chat that in. If you click on employers, it will pull up all of the relevant information for employers. We have a few different fact sheets. And the other one that I want to mention is this comprehensive list of different tasks that young workers may or may not do as a part of their job. We know that these tasks are sometimes things that employers don't immediately think of. So, for example, you might have a young worker who's working in retail, and so you might not immediately think, oh, this is someone who's going to be working with chemicals, but maybe part of their job is actually cleaning part of the store. And so they are working with chemicals. And so this list sort of helps you start thinking about what are some of the tasks that I may not have realized initially when hiring this worker that they are going to be engaged in. And that way you can think about the health and safety precautions that are needed. I just really want to mention here that we have a Cal OSHA consultation line available for everyone. So I highly encourage you to contact Cal OSHA if you have any questions. The consultation line operates separately from the force that does citations, and so it's really an opportunity for employers to just call to reach out to Cal OSHA. The QR code is for their website, access information about what tasks are and aren't legal for young workers because we know that it can be hard to find that information. So if you have a particular task or question about for your young workers, you can reach out to Cal OSHA and see if that is legal or not. And then you'll have time to make the change. So they won't cite you immediately. You'll have some time to make the change. So I see I'm at time. I'm going to take 2 more minutes, and sorry, Linda, for this, but I just want to mention that there is a new law called AB 800. It requires that this information be taught in schools. So you might find that young workers are already actually familiar with their rights in the workplace because they're required to get this fact sheet that is on this slide here. This is our Instagram, so I encourage you to follow us for more information. And then you'll be getting this slide deck, but I also have included the full list of resources here that I encourage you to check out. And my email is there as well if you have any follow-up questions.